The brave men and women of the police force often have to endure absolutely horrific scenes. Scenes which most of us would not be prepared for. Tonight, we have some of their most terrifying tales. So get comfortable and let the darkness take control. This story is from a friend of mine who used to work as a security guard. My friend is a night person, so he's used to night shifts. Well, anyway, one night he's working to guard a mansion, and at 2:22 on the dot, a door access alarm goes off from the gym room. By usual protocol, he calls 911 and has the cops deal with it. The cops, two of them, meet my friend and head to the gym room. A short while later, the cop starts yelling at my friend how prank calls are a serious offense and that he shouldn't be wasting their time. My friend was flabbergasted by the cop's reaction, and he asks what's wrong. And one of the cops says that an old lady told them that she was in the house for a long time. My friend, not understanding what lady they were talking about, since there was no lady in that mansion. The owners left on a cruise for a month or so, and they stop and stare at each other in silence and head inside the mansion. My friend swears that it's true. They go inside, and right at the entry hall, you can see a painting of the old lady. The cops turn white and leave. My friend, confused by what happened, just nopes out of there the moment he finished his shift. Apparently, that was a painting of the current owner's great-grandmother. I was a 911 dispatcher for about 5 years out of school. One night, I got a call from a lady at a residence in town. 911, what's your emergency? Is this the police? She was freaking out. Heavy breathing, scared, shaking voice. I've taken many calls like this, and from the sound of her voice, this was not going to be a routine call. I sat up straight, and my heart started to pump faster. Yes, Mum, what is your emergency? There's someone in my house, she trailed off. Very breathy and genuine, but not loud and freaking out. Okay, are you located at your home address? Yes. I dispatch the cars to start heading over to the address, and I don't give a reason yet. Okay, do you know who this person is? Well, no, I don't think so. I think it's... I know this sounds so crazy. I think there's a ghost in my house. She begins to sob, and she sounded so terrified. There's noises, and I know there's a ghost right in the other room. I can hear it now. At this time, the sergeant asks me for the reason of the caller, and why I sent him and 2 other cars without explanation. Normally you'd send 1 car to something like that. It's suspicious activity, I told him. What activity? He demanded over the radio. Sir, the caller is claiming that there's someone in the house, and she believes it to be a ghost. Silence on the air for about a minute. 10-4 is all he said. By the time they got there, the ghost was gone, and the poor lady was a freaked out mess, and she kept apologizing for calling us. But it was real. It was real, she kept repeating. The officers later told us that her sincerity actually freaked them out a lot, and they searched the house, guns drawn. Even they were scared. I am a small town cop. One time, we had an elderly woman with dementia call at about 3 a.m. and say that there was a baby hanging in her grandfather clock. I got there, and it was a pretty big house, and she had a single light on in the living room, making it even creepier. When she points out the clock, it's quite obvious she is hallucinating, but just imagining what she was seeing gives me the creeps. Ever since starting this job, I've had extreme sympathy for those with dementia or schizophrenia. I never knew what they went through before I started working as a cop. They hear or see people in their house in the middle of the night, and it must be absolutely horrific. We also had a guy in a plough truck get hit by a train during a snowstorm, obviously fatal. But the call came in as a train hitting a plough truck with no injuries. So when I show up, I start calmly walking up to the tracks, thinking the train just clipped the truck, or the driver got out before the truck got hit, and it would be a routine accident. Nope. I got to the tracks. I see a mangled plough truck in a small pond next to the tracks, and a yellow jacket floating with 2 boots sticking out of the water. The driver got ejected when the train doing 65 hit the truck and died instantly. I let out a "what the hell?" and then had to compose myself and call out what I was seeing on the radio. It was a little tough. Finally, I'll never forget my first unresponsive person. I'll never forget my first unresponsive person call. I was 23 years old and a week out of the academy, still obviously riding with my training officer. I got to the house before the medics, and it was a 30-year-old male. He was completely naked in bed, with 3 fans blowing on him. My training officer gave him a little sternum rub, and he opened his eyes and started moaning. Being the new guy, I get sent downstairs to start speaking with his mother about any medical conditions he had or medications he was taking. The medics get there and start bringing him down the stairs. He's white as a ghost, his eyes are wide open, and his mouth is hanging open. I hear my training officer say that he didn't look good, and one of the medics answers, "He's not, he just coded. No breathing, no pulse." Creepy thing is, as they were bringing him down the stairs, he was looking right at me. First thing I've ever seen is the emptiness that comes with someone who is technically dead. Happy ending though. The medics brought him back while they were en route to the hospital, and fortunately, he made it. I was new on the force, and sent to a home invasion in progress late in the night. I noticed my training officer didn't seem to be too concerned, and responded slowly, as opposed to the normal emergency response for crimes in progress. Upon arrival, he asked me if I had been to the home before. After I said no, he told me to go handle the call. As I walked towards the home, the garage opened, and an elderly lady, who was bent at a 90-degree angle at her waist, hobbled out. Without looking at me, she said to hurry, due to the fact that the 2 black male suspects were still in the home, although she used much more colourful and racist language. I noted that she couldn't straighten her back, and realised she was a bit off mentally. I then walked into the home with her behind me. While my eyes adjusted to the interior, I heard a click. I turned to find the lady locking 2 padlocks on the interior of the door. I then noted, as we were within the kitchen, that every cabinet and pantry also had a secured padlock on their doors. I looked down the hallway and found that every interior door of the small home was shut and secured with padlocks. I followed the elderly woman down the hall to the second door on the left. She began to unlock the padlock to every door and shouted, "They're in here." To my surprise, within the room, there was an older white guy sitting at a table using a desktop computer. He looked at me, greeted me, identified himself as the woman's husband, and then went back to whatever he was doing. The woman then pointed to an empty chair and began to yell, "They're under the chair. Oh no, they just ran outside, right there." The woman was pointing to a wall. After waiting for the woman to lock her husband back in the room, and then waiting for her to let me out of the kitchen door, I cursed my training officer and hightailed it out of there. That was my first exposure to mental illness, and it was creepy. My training officer said that the woman had supposedly been raped by 2 black males years ago, which had caused her mental breakdown, as well as her animosity. About 5 years ago, my mom was dating a guy who used to be a driver for a certain Texas police department. I won't name the city to protect their privacy. And this story occurred about 7 or 8 years before I was told. Anyway, so they get a call one day about a boat that has capsized in the Gulf. There were 3 people, parents and child on board. The parents managed to make it to shore. The child did not. The surface of the area had already been swept, and the kid was nowhere to be found, which unfortunately meant that the mission had gone from search and rescue to recovery of the deceased, hence the need for divers. 2 days passed, and nothing was found. On day 3, my mum's then boyfriend, Jay, was the unlucky diver that found him. If you're unaware, bodies decomposed a hell of a lot faster in water, and the poor kid was at the bottom. Jay quit immediately following that recovery. There are some things that you can experience and get past. There are some things you can't. At the time of me being told that story, he was still having nightmares from it. And he told me he felt a supreme sense of guilt, despite knowing that there was nothing he could have done, because it was just a kid. But seeing the condition of the kid, after 3 days at the bottom of the depths, was horrifying. And seeing that it was just a young kid that drowned in a freak accident, he could never get past that. It still haunts him to this day, I'm sure. This is about my father's first call on the fire department. They got a call for a man that attempted suicide. Not much detail to it. They arrive on the scene and enter the house, and find a guy in his mid-20s with a shotgun at his feet, and a huge hole through his head, and more blood than you think a body could hold. So my dad says out loud, "Oh my God, this guy's gotta be dead. Look at all that blood." To which one of the seniors reply, "Huh, you'd think, wouldn't you? That's nothing. Get over here and hold this guy's skull for me. He's still breathing." So now, my dad is holding this man's skull together, and my dad himself is about 23. And he told me, all I could think of at the moment was, Jesus Christ, what the hell did I sign up for? I just left a good-paying job where they offered me a manager's position, and I left it to join the fire department because my father and great-grandfather told me the benefits were good and that it was a very rewarding job. They ended up helping the guy and got him to hospital. He suffered severe brain damage, and I'm not too sure how long he lived after that. But my dad said it was the worst thing he'd ever endured, besides kid calls and car crashes. When they got back to the station, the chief called my dad into his office and said, "Look, I don't even know where to start after a call like that. Last time we had anything like that, it was about 15 years ago. These things don't happen often, and I understand if you want to take the week off. This was one of the worst calls I've seen, and I'm sorry it was your first." And my dad ended up taking the rest of the day off, and went in the rest of the week. My dad is one of my biggest heroes. He's seen some gruesome things in his life, and has endured a lot. I look up to him every day, as well as my grandfather. He's been through multiple wars, served on the fire department, and raised the best dad anyone could ask for. I kind of wish I didn't move out of state. I miss them a lot. Even though we call each other all the time, I miss the hugs. And I miss being able to hang out with them. And now, here's me, tearing up 5 minutes before my shift. I was doing security at a hospital with an ER, ICU, surgical, the whole works. And I got called to several paranormal calls. Most were psych cases or paranoid people that heard a strange noise. This time, more than one nurse saw a guy on the camera who was on his deathbed. A guy who kept saying, "I will not die in a hospital," earlier that day, and literally pushed his curtain aside and walked out of his room towards the elevator. The code was called, and everyone immediately posted at their designated locations. Within several seconds, there were people watching the elevators and stairs, and security started combing the area and investigating. As I reached the ICU floor, I spoke with the lead nurse, and she told me that several of the nurses saw him leave. At that moment, monitors started going off. The guy never left. He went code blue and died right there. There were 3 independent witnesses that reported saying he got up and left, which was serious enough to call a code, which could cost them their jobs if they were wrong. The bosses wouldn't let us watch the video, but the looks on their faces said it all. The bosses said that the nurses did the right thing, and that some things couldn't be explained. The portion of the video that I managed to sneak see did show that nobody had left via the elevator or stairs. I was stationed in Germany and lived in an old turn-of-the-century house that I rented out for an elderly couple that no longer lived in the area. The village only numbered around 115 people, and maybe 60% of that lived there year-round. During the night, there wasn't much light, so after dark settled around the hills and mountains, you heard a lot of noise. The house was big. I mean big. A finished basement, a mid-floor with our bedrooms and a living room. And then there was the upstairs, 9 rooms and around 3,200 square foot. The problem was upstairs. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm a police officer and not easily frightened. I've seen some shit. But I was not prepared for this. Upstairs, had one little side room, one giant room, which at first was our room, and then across from it was an equally sized room that was locked and had half of the landlady's old furniture and stuff. It stayed locked, and we weren't allowed in. Me and the wife always heard noises up there, creaks and occasionally bumps, and we often joked about ghosts. 1 month, my wife left and visited home back in the States. I was left all by myself. The noises across the hall started to pick up more and more, and that's when I noticed it. One night, I turned off all the lights and went to sleep. The noises woke me up. I shrugged it off and dozed back off, and that was probably only a second, until a loud voice was yelling at me right in the ear to wake up, in a loud, guttural voice. Freaked out, I ran for the light, looked around, and saw nothing. I noped out of there and went downstairs and set up my bed in one of the other rooms, and I didn't sleep there anymore. This story is from my father-in-law. He worked as a deputy for years, and just before he got his job with the state troopers, he got a call to check on an old man in his 80s, claiming that there was an alien in his closet. Now apparently, this man had been calling about aliens for 3 days, but whenever they sent anyone to check on it, they thought the guy was crazy. This was back in the late 70s or early 80s, in rural Florida. So apparently ignoring someone's emergency calls because crazy was something that was okay. So he gets to the guy's house, and the old man is immediately relieved. He starts going on and on about how he didn't know what he was going to do with the alien that he had locked in his closet, and asked if he should be bringing the military for backup. My father-in-law tells him that he is qualified to handle the situation, that it is part of the training. The whole thing gets the guy to calm down, and he goes and shows him the closet, and he is now concerned that there might actually be someone in there. The old guy opens the closet and shows him what's inside. Apparently, a Jehovah's Witness or some similar missionary had come to the old man's door, and because the missionary was Indian, he freaked out, whacked the guy over the head and tied him up in the closet. Poor guy was covered in shit and piss, and was totally dehydrated and barely coherent when he finally got out of the closet. Both the old man and the missionary ended up being taken to hospital, where the missionary got treatment and the old guy had to wait for his son to come get him, because they didn't want a repeat. My dad was a cop, and though this story isn't paranormal, it's one of my favourites. There was an elderly woman with dementia who had made several calls about various random intruders in her house. She was convinced of their presence, and the responding officers would calm her down, but the calls continued coming in for weeks. On this particular night, when my dad got the call, she was upset that someone had landed a small plane, a Cessna I believe, right in her living room and refused to leave. When he arrived at her house, he was invited inside and listened to the entirety of the woman's complaint. All the while, he regularly asked her to repeat herself, as it was really loud in there. Once he felt that she had fully explained her concerns with this imaginary airplane, he formulated a plan. He asked her where the living room was that the airplane was currently parked in. She gestured towards the sofa, and Dad pointed in the direction of the Imagiplane and shouted, "Sir, are you the pilot of this plane?" and paused for the pilot's response. "This is an unauthorized area for your aircraft, and I need you to move it immediately." He nodded a few times and watched as the imaginary pilot moved his imaginary plane out of the woman's living room. "Ma'am, he won't be giving you any further troubles." She was convinced that the plane was gone, and thanked my dad for actually listening to her concern. After all, dementia isn't lying. It seems very real to the people experiencing it as their reality. In the future, they had far fewer calls about airplanes in the living room. After all, that pilot got a stern warning from a lawman. I am a 911 call taker, and I received a 911 call from a frantic woman stating that there was a burglar in her home. The caller told me that she went out for a cigarette at night, and when she was going outside, noticed that the front door was open a crack. She closed it and went to the backyard to have a smoke. It was there that she saw the basement light was on through the window, and saw what she described as a thin, tall white male with dark jeans, a black jacket and scarf, and a ski mask hat with a pom-pom on top. The caller went back to her home and locked the back door, gathered her family in the bedroom, which was 8 to 10 feet from the hallway that led to the basement. At this point, the police had been dispatched and arrived on the scene. Multiple surrounding towns responded to set up the perimeter. The back and front were both covered, and the basement had bars on the windows, so all exits were covered. The police got the spare key hidden from the caller's direction that I relayed to them. They entered the home and did an interior search and found no one there. The caller was very sure on what she'd seen and could even tell facial features. The caller had no history of mental illness and had never made a call like that before. She ends up taking her kids and stays with a family a few towns over. The police cleared since there was no suspect, and no way if anyone was inside that they could get out. Our next shift, one of the senior guys who had been there nearly 26 years told us that he responded to a suicide of a young white male in the basement. Apparently, he had shot himself with his father's shotgun, which was in a case on the wall near where the caller described him standing and looking around. We all believe that she saw a ghost that night. I was a police officer in the UK. A few years back, we were receiving phone calls from an elderly lady that lived alone. She was reporting seeing arms reaching through the walls in her living room, and also hearing the sounds of screaming, wailing, and children laughing. I believe she was slightly confused and, unfortunately, might have the early stages of dementia, which naturally led everyone to believe she was imagining it. One day, we get a call from someone who is visiting her, saying that she has just seen arms coming through the walls in the old fireplace. The officers turn up, and after a bit of digging around the fireplace, it turns out that the teenage kids of the scummy family next door had somehow found a gap in the brickwork just up inside the chimney and were taunting this old lady by sticking their arms through and making ghost noises through the gap. They'd also been spraying deodorant in her house. It wasn't me who dealt with this, so unfortunately I didn't have any details about what happened with the sickos and whether or not they were prosecuted. But let's just imagine the old lady eventually passed on, turned into a poltergeist, and tormented all of them into madness. I have only been a police officer for 2 years now. I would not say that I am a firm believer in the supernatural. That being said though, I have no explanation for what happened on this night. This wasn't a call I was responding to, but I was just driving around and observed a vehicle parked alone in the middle of a church parking lot. This was a night, so I figured that maybe some kids were doing something that kids do, right? So I pull up on the car from the side and see that no one is inside the vehicle. I then position my car behind it so I can run the plate. Maybe someone stole it and dumped it in the lot. I start to run the plate and look at the car through the window, and I kid you not, there was a person in the front seat looking at me through the rearview mirror. This is something you notice as a cop, because when you do traffic stops you can tell how intently someone is really watching you inside your car, and possibly if they're going to try something. So I get an "oh shit" moment, as I didn't see that there were people inside, and drive up directly next to it to reassure what I saw. And there was no one inside the car. Chills immediately ran down my back, and I noped out of there. The car was later gone. I don't know what happened. I don't know what I saw, but I was pretty freaked out. Me and my partners used to sit at that church on quiet nights, because it's tucked away and you can relax, and I have not sat there since. Back when I was working as a cop on a military base, I loved working the night shift. We didn't have to deal with 99% of the bullshit that the day shift have to deal with. And what little stuff we did deal with was usually really interesting. Well, most every building in the base is alarmed, and the alarms are tied right into the desk, so we know the instant they go off. When we get an alarm activation, we close the base and go check the building, pull on all the doors and see if we can get in. If we can, we go into the building and secure it, check all the doors and corners to see if someone's alarm went off. Well, one night, I was on patrol with my alpha partner, and we get called to respond to an alarm activation at the elementary school. So we go secure the building and call in that the building is all secure. No problem, keep patrolling. So about 15 to 20 minutes go by and we get another alarm activation. We get back out there and check, and now there is a maintenance door open that leads into a boiler room thing. Nothing in it, so we closed it, locked it and got out. Another 20 minutes go by and another alarm. We respond, all the doors are still locked and we can't get in. The maintenance door is locked. Call in the all clear. This time, my buddy and I sit on the opposite sides of the school and watch to see if someone is coming in and trying to yank on the doors really hard to set them off. We sit there and nothing happens. And right when we're about to leave, another alarm activation goes off right as we're sitting there. We inform the desk that we'd like the building manager on site to help us secure the interior and let us in, as it is now about 3 a.m. The building custodian shows up and we start doing a walkthrough, checking all the classrooms and checking all the maintenance rooms. And that's when we see one of the maintenance doors open with the lights on in the room. Now this room is literally the size of a closet. We walk down there and look in. No one's in it, and the door is locked when it closes. We look in there, and we find a single footprint of a bare foot made of water. It appears to be the footprint of a small child. It freaked the living hell out of us, because no one reported a missing child, and the entire building was clear and still locked up. No one left, and no one entered, and we checked every inch of that damn place. It freaked the ever-loving shit out of us to this day. My partner still refuses to go into that school. Speaking of which, schools are really creepy when they're empty. I work as an EMT and had to respond to this call. I'll start with the fact that this was up in the mountains, about 8,000 feet altitude. This guy calls 911 and claims that there is a snake in his hotel room. So we go check it out with the fire crew. We show up to a guy freaking out, saying that there is a python loose in his room. He claims there is a piranha trying to escape from the python's mouth, but the spirits in the python's brain are telling the python that it can't let the piranha go. Okay, now we know something is wrong with this guy. We walk in the room to find a roll-up towel sticking out of the bathroom door. The man claimed he had trapped the python in the door, and he was trying to let the piranha escape. We found acid and heroin inside of the rolled-up towel. The dude was having a great time until the towel stole his drugs. More drug-induced than paranormal. But the dude thought his towel was possessed. One night, I was talking to my friend's mother. She was telling me about why she could never in a million years live in a trailer. Here is her story. I was about 5 years old, and my parents moved us out into this trailer on about 2 or 3 acres of land. My room was at the far end of the house next to my sister's, and was only about 20 yards from the forest. Anyway, on a few nights I kept hearing a scratching sound, almost like nails on a chalkboard. So I woke up, and my dad came in and verified that I was batshit crazy and went back to bed. This went on for about 2 to 3 weeks, until one night I was listening to the scratching when it suddenly stopped, and my toy chest started moving away from the wall. I ran down the hall, got my dad, and he reluctantly came to my room to check it out. When he flipped on the light, he saw a woman's head looking like a crazy Gene Wilder, sticking through my wall where my toy chest used to be. She screamed at the top of her lungs, not like she was scared, but like she was trying to scare him, and proceeded to pull at the trailer, trying to crawl through the hole. He locked the door and called 911. The cops came out and arrested the woman who was stuck halfway in the wall and cut all over the place. She had apparently escaped a mental facility 4 miles away and decided to burrow into the house at night. My grandmother was a cop in Santa Maria in the late 70s until the early 90s. A man calls in saying that there is a 7-foot grey man at his door. She goes to check it out. The door is jammed. The man is screaming, and she hears a loud buzzard. She slams the door open, and the buzz is gone, and so is the man. There's blood everywhere. She calls for backup and runs around and calls his name. She hears what sounds like someone yelling, but someone is covering their mouth. She finds him tied up, piss everywhere. Investigators say that he was in that room for at least 4 hours. The man lives alone in the middle of nowhere and says he called the police 5 hours ago. They said that a cop was on their way, and he reported seeing a 7-foot grey man with big eyes who did that to him. No footprints, no trace of any kind of invasion, and my grandmother lost 4 hours somehow. The guy ended up killing himself a few years later, leaving a note behind, warning my grandmother that they are after him and thanking her for rescuing him. Shit got crazy. One time, I called the cops. I was getting ready for bed and turned off all the lights and the TV, shut the windows, and headed for the hallway, which was still lit. As soon as I saw the Jesus part of our hanging crucifix lying face down on the floor, the blinds and windows started going crazy, even though they were shut. I was a little shaken and decided not to go to bed until I could calm down. So I turned the TV back on, and it was just static, and the volume was turned to the max. Now I was in full panic mode, because I couldn't get the TV to shut off, and I dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? I'm not sure, can you just send someone over to make sure no one's broken into my house? I felt horrible for bothering them. After they assured me I was alone, I asked one of the officers to pick Jesus up off the floor and put him back. He did. They ended up sticking around and just talking with me to calm me down, while I waited for a friend to come and spend the night. I always respected law enforcement, but that night I realized just how helpful some of them are, even when the situation is as small as mine. I am a police officer in Florida. I had an older lady call that she was trapped in her house. When I arrived, I observed a white powder poured out in a half circle on the front of her door. I knocked. She spoke through a nearby window and explained that a voodoo priest had put a hex on her and trapped her in her house. She claimed that if she crossed the powder, her back would break, and I told her to sit on her couch and wait, and that I would be back soon. I went to a store where I knew the clerk. I borrowed a bucket and a broom and returned to the lady's house. I filled the bucket from a gardening hose, while saying the Lord's Prayers loud enough for her to hear inside, swept and rinsed the powder away, and then I told her it was safe. She opened the door and asked what I'd done, and I told her I'd gone to church for holy water and had a priest bless the broom. She was so happy, she hugged me for a long time. I got the name and the location of the voodoo priest from her, and I was able to find him later in my shift. I got in his face and told him that if he bothered the lady again, I'd kick his ass and take him to jail. We will not allow harassment, scamming, or preying on the elderly. I was a parks officer for a downtown metropolitan out in the Pacific Northwest. I saw my fair share of weird stuff on my 5-to-1 shift. Naked bike ride after party at midnight, with about 1,000 or so naked people chilling out. The occasional couple having sex. Homeless person masturbating or shooting up heroin. And the occasional dead body. Were all part of the routine job. Anyway, this one night we were sent to investigate a tent set up relatively near the waterfront, which was generally a homeless person that was trying to stay dry for the night. So we get there around 11:30 and tell the lady inside that she has to go a few hundred yards away to an area that isn't patrolled. She fusses and bitches about having to move, and then mentioned a man living in a cave at the bottom of a shallow ravine nearby that had been killing animals and eating them. We ask her for more information, and she just points to a general direction about 50 yards away through some thick brush. The general area most people wouldn't wander past. My partner and I start to walk through the thick brush with just our flashlights and eventually stumble upon the ravine. And sure enough, there's a small opening on the side, enough for a person to fit through. I scale down about 20 feet. I look in the opening and see what seems like a massive pile of magazines, torn pages, articles of clothing, and a sugar cookie tin, as well as a gorilla costume hand, and some crude-looking tools including a makeshift bow, a few knives, and other generally weird shit. Being curious, and that the cave was empty, I opened the sugar cookie tin and found a large amount of what seemed like raw animal meat. At this point, I was thoroughly freaked out, and decided that we should leave. We never found out what came of the guy who was staying there, or what was going on, but it definitely got freaky around midnight in pitch black conditions. I am a police officer. 3 years ago, I was living in Colorado. This station got a call about a ghost in someone's house. I wasn't the one on the phone, but apparently the person was hysterical and hard to understand. I arrive on the scene, and this woman of about 40 was standing in a front yard. The house is upper middle class and pretty bland. She swears that there is a ghost inside. The only reason we didn't disregard the call is because she claimed she was screaming in her attic. She claimed the ghost was doing it. I was supposed to make sure an animal wasn't stuck up there or something, and she explained that she'd been hearing this screaming and bumping on the walls for the past 2 days. She was the only person that lived there, so no pets could cause it, and all the neighbors are on vacation. So of course, the logical explanation is a ghost. She was far too afraid to check the attic, so I head up there. It was full of cobwebs and musty, and of course the only light bulb didn't work. I take a step, and all of a sudden I hear a banging and a muffled yell. Navigating with my flashlight, I head over to the source, a corner in the far back. There was a hobo there. His leg had fallen through the floor and was stuck. He couldn't get out. He was crying tears of joy when I walked over, thanked me, and asked for help simultaneously. I pulled him out, trying to scratch his leg as little as possible, and lead him outside after letting him stop and get some water. He told me he was just looking for a place to spend the night, and I felt like he had gotten punished enough for his trespass. I asked him if he needed anything else before I sent him on his way, and he just smiled and thanked me and walked away. Being a police officer can be a challenging career, yes, but I am glad that I showed pity to that poor guy. It was obvious that he was down on his luck, and there was no sense arresting him. I never did see him again, so I hope he never had to break another law, as well as manage to get back on his feet. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I think it's safe to say that the police do not have an easy job. I know I certainly wouldn't be up for it. If you enjoyed today's video, please don't forget to leave a like and subscribe, as well as drop a comment with your thoughts, as it goes a long way. I would also like to give a big shout out to my friend Briefcase, who has just uploaded a video. If you haven't seen it already, it is some incredible work. He does these crimes which I've never ever heard of, which I find quite intriguing. It's called The Gold Bars Murder. I've already checked it out, and it's a seriously good video, and I'd strongly recommend that everyone here goes and checks it out after. I'll leave a link in the description and at the end of the video for you guys to see it too. It's so good, seriously, don't miss it. But anyway, for now guys, I'm gonna sign off. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.